I did not flinch when he said it. I did not blink, did not gasp, did not give him the satisfaction of a single cracked syllable in my voice. I work as a corporate risk analyst, and 3 days a week I take the early shift visiting my father at Riverside Rehabilitation, where he's recovering from hip surgery. That Thursday morning, I was standing at the check-in counter signing the visitor log when the elevator doors opened, and my ex-husband walked out like he owned the building. Beside him, holding a baby girl wrapped in a pink blanket against her shoulder, was my younger cousin, the cousin I grew up sharing a bedroom with at every family reunion. The cousin who stood next to me at my own wedding holding my bouquet while I said my vows. He saw me before she did. His face split into that smug, theatrical grin I used to mistake for charm. "Well, isn't this something?" he said, loud enough that 2 nurses at the station turned their heads. "Look who it is. Still showing up to places alone, huh?" I didn't answer. I kept my pen moving across the sign-in sheet. "You know," he continued, stepping closer, "I used to lie awake at night wondering if I made a mistake leaving you. But then Felicity here gave me an actual family, a real one. Something you were never built to give me." He glanced down at the baby with a tenderness that made my stomach twist, then looked back at me, eyes glittering with cruelty. Funny how the universe works. The wife who couldn't carry a pregnancy past 12 weeks 3 times, and the cousin who got it right on the first try. My cousin's face went white. She at least had the decency to look ashamed. I held his gaze, counted my own heartbeat, slow, even, controlled, and finally allowed myself to smile. "Congratulations," I said simply. "Truly. I hope she's everything you wanted." He blinked, thrown by the absence of tears. "Is it? No screaming? No crying? Should I be doing something else, Garrison?" "I just figured—" "You figured wrong." I checked my watch. A small, deliberate gesture. "If you'll excuse me, I have somewhere to be." What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had already known about the baby for 4 months. I had known since the moment my father's old business partner, a retired federal auditor named Holt, who still played poker with my dad every other Sunday, mentioned over beers that he'd seen some unusual wire activity connected to Garrison's company. I had known because I'd spent every night since then quietly building a case file thick enough to bury a man. I am 34 years old. My name doesn't matter for this story so much as what I do, which is read numbers the way other people read faces, for the lies hidden underneath. I built my career at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, specializing in internal fraud investigations for companies that suspected something was rotten in their books but couldn't prove it. I am good at my job. I am, according to my last 3 performance reviews, exceptional at it. Garrison and I married young, 26 and 28, in a small ceremony at his parents' lake house in the Blue Ridge foothills. For the first 3 years, things were good, or at least good enough that I didn't question them. He worked as a regional vice president for a logistics and freight company, the kind of job that came with a company car, a corner office, and a personality that swelled to fill every room he entered. I loved him in the uncomplicated way you love someone before you know what they're capable of. The trouble started when I lost our second pregnancy. I had already lost one before that, early, quietly, the kind of loss you're not supposed to grieve too loudly because it happens to so many women. But the second one happened at 12 weeks, after we'd already told his parents, after we'd already picked out a name. I remember the drive home from the hospital more clearly than almost anything else in my life. The silence in the car, Garrison's hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't trust himself to say. He started staying later at the office. He started taking calls in the garage with the door shut, and he started talking in this offhand, almost philosophical way about how some women just weren't built for it, how maybe it was nature's way of telling us something, how maybe we should reassess our expectations of each other. I didn't realize, not that recessing expectations meant he had already started reassessing them with my cousin Felicity, who at the time was 26 and working as an event coordinator at the same hotel where my company occasionally hosted client dinners. I would learn later that their first encounter happened at one of those very dinners, a charity gala for a children's hospital, of all the bitter ironies, 18 months before our divorce was finalized. The divorce itself was almost clinical in its cruelty. Garrison's family had money, old logistics money, the kind built across 3 generations of trucking routes and warehouse contracts, and he used every dollar of it to make sure the split favored him. His lawyer argued, successfully, that since I made comparable income and we had no children, I deserved nothing beyond what was legally mine. I walked away with my car, my retirement account, and a storage unit full of furniture I never bothered to pick up. He kept the house. He kept our shared investment portfolio, the one I'd helped him manage, the one that included a small stake in his company's employee stock program that I had, in my naivety, never insisted on splitting properly. I told myself I was fine. I told myself professional women in their early 30s bounce back from things like this. I threw myself into work, took on cases nobody else wanted, stayed at the office until the cleaning crew started recognizing my car in the parking lot. And somewhere in those long nights, surrounded by spreadsheets that weren't even mine, I started noticing something strange. It started as idle curiosity. I still had access to certain databases through professional networking platforms, the kind auditors use to verify corporate filings and public disclosures. One night, half out of habit and half out of something uglier, call it obsession, call it the part of me that couldn't fully let go, I typed Garrison's company name into a public SEC filing search. What I found made me sit very still in my dark apartment for almost an hour. Garrison's company, Halloway Freight Logistics, had been quietly restructuring its regional distribution contracts for the past 2 years. On paper, it looked like standard cost optimization, consolidating routes, renegotiating vendor terms. But buried in the footnotes of a routine quarterly filing was a reference to a newly formed subsidiary, registered in Delaware under a name I didn't recognize. Meridian Crest Holdings. I cross-referenced the registered agent. I cross-referenced the listed officers. And there, 3 layers deep in a chain of paperwork, designed specifically to be boring enough that no one would ever read it twice, was Garrison's name, listed as a managing member. I am, professionally speaking, supposed to report things like this through proper channels when they come from client work, but this wasn't client work, this was personal. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt something other than grief. I felt purpose. Over the following months, working carefully and entirely on my own time, I built a complete picture. Meridian Crest Holdings existed for one reason: to siphon a percentage of every shipping contract Halloway Freight processed through a consulting fee structure that no actual consulting work justified. Garrison wasn't just skimming from his employer. He was skimming from a publicly traded company, which meant he was skimming indirectly from thousands of shareholders, retirement funds, and pension holders who trusted that company's reported earnings to be accurate. It also meant the money he was so casually flaunting, the new lake house he and Felicity had apparently just closed on, the nursery she'd been posting about online with a hashtag I refused to let myself read twice, wasn't coming from his salary. It was coming from fraud. Federal securities fraud, to be precise, the kind that doesn't just end a career, it ends a life as you know it. I didn't go to the SEC immediately. I am not, despite what this story might suggest, a vengeful person by nature. I spent another 6 weeks making absolutely certain I wasn't wrong, because being wrong about something like this, making an accusation I couldn't fully back, would have destroyed my own career as thoroughly as I was about to destroy his. I built spreadsheets. I traced wire transfers through 3 shell entities. I found the offshore account in the Caymans where roughly $2.3 million had quietly accumulated over 26 months. And then, almost by accident, I found something else. Something that had nothing to do with money. Buried in an old county court filing, a paternity action, sealed but not sealed well enough for someone with my particular skills. I found a name I didn't expect. Felicity's daughter, the baby Garrison, had been so smugly cradling outside my father's rehab facility, wasn't his. The filing was from 8 months earlier, initiated by a man named Desmond Ruiz, a contractor Felicity had been seeing in the gap between Garrison leaving me and Garrison officially being with her. The DNA results were inconclusive at 90% confidence, not because the test failed, but because the lab notes indicated insufficient cooperation in scheduling follow-up testing. Someone had quietly stalled the process. I had a theory about who and why, and I was right. I went to the FBI's field office in Charlotte on a Tuesday morning before work, wearing the same charcoal blazer I wear when I need people to take me seriously. I didn't go to the SEC first, because securities fraud at this scale, layered with potential wire fraud across state lines, falls under federal jurisdiction, and I wanted this handled by people who couldn't be bought off or stonewalled by a well-connected family law firm. I brought everything. 3 years of training had taught me how to build a case file that prosecutors actually want to open, organized, sourced, time-stamped, unimpeachable. The agent who took my statement, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Agent Pruitt, looked through the first 20 pages of my documentation, and then looked up at me with an expression I'll never forget. "You did all this yourself?" I had motivation. The investigation took 4 months. I won't pretend those 4 months were easy. I kept working, kept showing up at my father's rehab on my regular schedule, kept running into Felicity occasionally in the parking lot, where she'd offer me these small, guilty smiles like we were still the kind of family that smiled at each other. I never said a word. I let her keep thinking she'd won something. The arrest happened at, of all places, a company holiday party. Garrison had just finished giving a toast, something about building on strong foundations, a phrase that nearly made me laugh out loud when I read about it later, when 2 federal agents walked through the ballroom doors. I wasn't there to see it myself, but my cousin's mother, my own aunt, called me sobbing within the hour, demanding to know if I'd had something to do with it. I read public filings, I told her, which was true, even if it left out the part where I'd spent 4 months turning those filings into a federal indictment. Garrison was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Because the consolidated losses to shareholders exceeded $1 million, sentencing guidelines under federal law put him looking at somewhere between 7 and 12 years, depending on cooperation and restitution. He took a plea deal 11 months later rather than risk trial, securing a sentence of 8 years at a federal facility in Georgia, with mandatory restitution of $2.3 million, every dollar of which came directly out of the offshore account I had traced, which the FBI seized within weeks of my original report. Felicity's unraveling was slower and in its own way sadder. Once Garrison's assets were frozen, the lake house went into foreclosure within 4 months. She wasn't charged criminally. She genuinely hadn't known about Meridian Crest, but she lost the engagement ring, the car, the entire fantasy life she'd built on someone else's stolen foundation. The paternity case resolved not long after, this time without any mysterious scheduling delays. Desmond Ruiz was confirmed as the biological father. He sued for full custody, citing Felicity's demonstrated pattern of instability, and won primary custody 8 months later. Felicity now sees her daughter every other weekend, supervised for the first year per the custody agreement, and works as a leasing agent at a budget apartment complex outside the city. I saw her once more almost a year after that morning at the rehab facility. We crossed paths at our grandmother's funeral, both of us in black, both of us pretending the other one was a stranger for the sake of family peace. She caught my eye near the parking lot afterward and said, quietly, "I hope you're happy." "I am," I told her, and meant it completely. I used my settlement from the divorce, modest as it was, combined with a portion of the whistleblower award the SEC granted me under federal securities law, since my report directly led to recovered funds, to open my own consulting practice 18 months ago. I specialize now in exactly the kind of work that saved me: forensic financial investigation for women navigating high-conflict divorces, where they suspect a spouse is hiding assets. My calendar book's out 4 months in advance. I hired 2 junior analysts last spring, both women, both sharper than I was at their age. My father, fully recovered now, walks 3 miles a day and tells anyone who'll listen that his daughter took down a Fortune 500 embezzler practically by herself, which isn't entirely accurate but isn't entirely wrong either. I bought a small house with a garden I'm slowly learning to keep alive. I am, for the first time in years, exactly where I'm supposed to be. People sometimes ask me, when they hear the broad strokes of this story, whether I regret not screaming at him that day in the hallway, not throwing something, not giving him the dramatic confrontation he was clearly hoping for. I don't. I learned a long time ago that the loudest reaction in the room is rarely the most powerful one. Real power is quiet. It shows up months later, in a federal courtroom, in a foreclosure notice, in a custody ruling you never saw coming, because you were too busy gloating in a hospital hallway to notice someone was already building your downfall, one document at a time. He told me I wasn't built for the things that mattered. He was right, in a way he never intended. I wasn't built for motherhood the way he wanted. I was built for something else entirely, for finding what people try hardest to hide, and making absolutely certain it sees the light.